Miscarriages of justice rarely begin in the courtroom. They are often seeded much earlier in the cultures we build, the assumptions we make, and the way we treat one another, both in society and in the workplace. Today, we're asking hard questions about how culture can create the conditions for wrongful convictions. We'll be looking beyond the headlines to the subtle, everyday moments where things start to go wrong, the workplace rumour, the unchecked bias, the unchecked fact, which we see all too often, the silence that follows when someone sees injustice and feels unable to speak. In the context of the NHS, which will be a large focus of today's talks, this conversation takes on a particular urgency. The health service is rightly seen as a source of compassion, care, and integrity. Yet, like most areas we see involving wrongful convictions, it is also a human institution, and things go wrong. When pressures are immense, when hierarchy discourages challenge, when blame is used instead of learning, the consequences can be devastating. Too often, we have seen how toxic workplace cultures, poor communication, fear of reputational harm can distort the truth and obscure accountability. The phrase "from flawed beginnings to broken lives" captures, I think, that trajectory all too well. A misunderstanding becomes a rumour becomes an accusation. Unchallenged, this becomes an institutional truth in whichever context you see that. And before long, as many of us in this room have seen, time and time again, and since I was an undergraduate student in 1991, I've been sort of working on these cases. You see persons' lives, reputations, and freedom, and those reputations are damaged forever. And this is not just about the justice system, or the NHS, or any single profession. It's about how, as a society, we respond to error. Do we rush to blame? Do we seek to understand? Do we silence voices, or do we make space for them? Do we protect systems, which we see across wrongful conviction cases? Do we protect systems, or do we protect people? The wrongful conviction of any individual represents not only a personal tragedy, but a collective failure, and a failure of empathy, of process, and of culture. And while the law ultimately may deliver that verdict, and we've seen a lot of talk about abolishing juries recently after the Leveson report, the conditions that enable injustice are often built long before that first piece of evidence is heard by the courts. Over the course of today, we'll hear from speakers who have lived, researched, and challenged these failures, from legal practitioners, campaigners, and academics, to those within the NHS and other public institutions who have seen firsthand how cultures of fear and defensiveness can take root. We will explore themes of bullying, cover-ups, blame, but also of courage, integrity, and reform. Because the purpose of this conference is not simply to identify what is wrong, but it is to ask, how can we make it right? How can we build environments both in our workplaces and our justice systems that prioritize fairness, truth, and accountability? We must remember that culture is not an abstract thing. It is created and reinforced by the daily choices of ordinary people. Each of us has a role in shaping it by the conversations we allow, the biases we challenge, and the values we uphold, when it would be easier perhaps to look away and to walk away. Almost finished. So as we begin, I invite you to engage not just as professionals, but as people, to listen deeply, to question assumptions, and to think about what that means in your own context. And we'll allow time to have a Q&A at the end where we'll sort of draw all these questions together. Because if flawed beginnings can lead to broken lives, then perhaps the reverse is also true, that better beginnings can lead to repaired lives and renewed trust. And as Lord Leggett recently stated in his opening comments in the case of Tom Hayes and Carlo Palumbo, and I'd urge you to sort of read that recent case that came out of the Supreme Court, because Tom and Carlo had their convictions overturned. It took them a lot of fighting to get to the Supreme Court. But the first sentence that Lord Leggett said was, "The history of these two cases raises concerns about the effectiveness of our criminal appeal system in England and Wales in confronting error." And that's coming out of the Supreme Court. So, after all, if the Supreme Court is saying it now, it must be true. We're all fighting the system, but now the Supreme Court have said it. It's true, so we must do something about it. But I think it has to change. I've been saying this for a long time. I can see Dennis, Edie over there from the Code of Innocence Project, who I've worked with since the early 1990s. But it has to change from bottom to the top. And at least perhaps the Supreme Court have now said something which I ultimately agree with, that it's not effective. So if they've said it, there's hope. So thank you for being here. Thank you for caring enough to join this debate on a rainy Saturday in Manchester, and for your commitment to justice, both inside and outside the courtroom. I'll finish with the phrase that I start my lectures with to my miscarriages of justice students. It can happen to anyone. And until it happens to you or someone you care about, you just don't realise how flawed our criminal justice system is.